What is intelligence in psychology? Is it somebody's IQ score? Is it how quickly they can solve math problems? Is it their ability to think logically and abstractly? Is it their creativity? Is it how big their glasses are? I mean, what is it about people that makes them intelligent according to psychology? Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about intelligence and what it is in psychology. So intelligence in psychology is an inherently tricky concept, I must admit. There are so many different ways of looking at it and measuring it. However, this is a concept that psychologists study scientifically, meaning there is some way that psychologists actually think about and define this concept. So let's talk about what intelligence really is. Intelligence is a difficult concept to study for a couple of reasons. The big one is that it's a culturally defined concept. So depending on where you are in the world, intelligence could mean a myriad of different things. It's culturally defined, it's abstract. It's not something that you can measure in a physical, 100% objective way. It's conceivably made up of hundreds of different behaviors that are indicative of a person's mental state. But it's not like you could just take a look at somebody's brain and be like, hey, this is the area that intelligence is located, and be like, oh yeah, this person's really smart because they have a giant brain region there. No, it doesn't work like that. Intelligence is abstract. We can only measure it based on the behaviors or indicators that suggest this very culturally based kind of concept. And that does make it trickier to both define properly and to study scientifically. And this means it's not just a person's knowledge, it's not just their skill in a certain area, whether that's logic or abstract thinking or creativity or whatever it might be. It's made up of all of these different things and more, as we're going to find out. Oh, and very importantly, it's not just IQ. So a very general kind of definition of intelligence when it comes to psychology is a person's ability to reason abstractly, adapt to new situations within their environment, and both use and learn new information. So even then, it's still kind of a lot of things. And even within this definition, there's still other types of intelligence that are not really well captured by this definition, which is what makes it so tricky to study in psychology, and why psychologists actually look at a whole bunch of different types of intelligence to try to better encompass all of the different mental skills and behaviors that can indicate this very broad concept. So let's take a look at some of the different types of intelligence that a psychologist might study in their work. The first type we're going to look at is called crystallized intelligence, and you can think of this as the knowledge base that you have acquired over the course of your lifetime. So a person's crystallized intelligence when they're very young probably isn't going to be very good because they are so young, they haven't had a lot of personal experiences yet or learned a lot of things yet. And over time, their crystallized intelligence or their knowledge will keep growing as you accumulate more and more information and knowledge about the world. Fluid intelligence is your ability to reason abstractly and logically about new information. So if I were to give you a puzzle that you've never seen before that is very logic focused, how quickly and accurately could you solve that puzzle? So this is really looking at your logic and adaptability skills. And fluid intelligence tends to be best actually when we're very young. So it tends to peak somewhere in your 20s. And then from there on out, it does start to lose some of its luster, I guess you could say. Working memory is how well a person can keep information in mind and use it. So some people can have, let's say, 7 to 10 pieces of information in mind at one time and be actively using that information as well. While other people who may have a less skilled working memory might only be able to hold, let's say, 3 or 4 items in mind at one time and be actively using them. So working memory is the information that you are currently using. How much of that can you use at one time? And working memory is also one of those types of intelligence that tends to be the best when we're younger and does decrease as we age. So now we're going to get into some of the lesser known types of intelligence that psychologists also look at. One of the big types is emotional intelligence. So how good are you with emotions? How well do you understand both your own emotions and emotional states and be able to predict those and manage them? And how well do you understand the emotions of others, the cues that they're giving off, how to react under different emotional situations and things like that. You've probably never heard of dispositional intelligence, but this is the intelligence that people exhibit when they're really good at understanding others' personality and understanding how people's inherent patterns of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors can predict their behavior across time and across situations. So how well can you figure out what a person is going to do based on their personality? And we also have cognitive complexity. So this is how complex a person's need to explain the world is. So you could have a situation that a bunch of different people observe, and you have one person with a high level of cognitive complexity who explains that situation from multiple perspectives and is really trying to dig into the underlying motives of the people who were involved in that situation, and they come up with this really elaborate, deep, well thought out explanation. And then you might have somebody with a lower level of cognitive complexity who just sees it in a very straightforward way and doesn't really think of a lot of very difficult explanations. So that's cognitive complexity. So as you can see, there really isn't one standardized measure when it comes to measuring intelligence because it is so complex. And this makes sense because it's a complicated idea if you really think about it. I mean, when we say somebody's intelligent, we may have, some idea in our mind of what that means, but it really is difficult to nail down what specifically it is that makes somebody intelligent. It's really a combination of all these different things. Now, if you've studied psychology, then you'll know that there are a couple of really popular theories of intelligence that deconstruct intelligence into multiple different components. So we have Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence that breaks intelligence down into three main concepts, which include analytical intelligence, practical intelligence, and creative intelligence. So analytical intelligence is just your ability to think logically and mathematically. So it's kind of this stereotypical type of intelligence that we all have in our heads when we're thinking of intelligence. Practical intelligence refers to kind of your social skills and your ability to interact well with people in your world. It can also include things like street smarts, or being able to take knowledge and apply it to the real world. And creative intelligence is your ability to think original thoughts and think outside of the box and use information in novel ways. So it's basically how unorthodox and innovative you are. Another really popular theory of intelligence is Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, and this one seems to be really popular with lay people and on the internet. So Gardner basically proposes that there are 8 different types of intelligences that people can possess, and this includes kinesthetic intelligence, or how well you use your body, interpersonal intelligence, which is how well you're able to interact with and understand other people, intrapersonal intelligence, which is how well you understand yourself and your own self-knowledge. Logical intelligence, which is, of course, your ability with logic and math, so it's kind of that analytical intelligence described by Sternberg in the previous theory. Musical intelligence, which is how well you understand rhythm, sound, music, basically. Naturalistic intelligence, which is your ability to interact with your environment and understand your environment. So somebody who's a gardener, for example, might be really high in this type of intelligence. Linguistic intelligence, which is your ability to speak well and also your skill in understanding other languages. And finally, visual intelligence, which is how well you're able to imagine and manipulate objects in space. So somebody who's an architect, for example, might be really strong in this type of intelligence. But what these theories really emphasize is that there is no one way to be intelligent. People can be intelligent in a myriad of ways outside of the logical, abstract version of intelligence that we usually think of. Now, I know what you're thinking. What about IQ? Yes, IQ tests do measure intelligence, but you have to understand that There's many different ways to look at intelligence, and IQ testing tends to really specifically be used in educational settings or public health settings, or if somebody has potentially a cognitive impairment that needs diagnosing, so also healthcare. There are different situations where an IQ test would be used, but when it comes to the scientific evaluation of intelligence, you'll sometimes see IQ testing, but you're actually more likely to see some of these other types of intelligence that I talked about, like crystallized or fluid or working memory and things like that. With an IQ test, you probably know that the average score is 100, and they standardize the test every single year, so the average is always going to be 100. If you score above this, you're supposedly above average in intelligence, and if you score below this, you're below average. And if you score below 70, then that can be an indication of some kind of an intellectual disability or a cognitive impairment. Now, intelligence does look at things like processing speed, analytic ability, reasoning, and things like that, but modern-day IQ tests also go broader than this. So they also look at things like perception ability and verbal skills. So types of intelligence beyond just the stereotypical analytical ability. And this is a good thing because intelligence is so complex, there's no way that it could actually be represented through just one number, which is what intelligence tests give you, but you can also break that down into the separate subcomponents that make up the test. Now, unfortunately, if you have taken some kind of an IQ test online only to discover that you yourself are so incredibly gifted, I hate to break it to you, but any test that you find online to measure your IQ is not valid. These tests have to be administered by a trained professional. So unless you visited, for example, a clinical psychologist who is trained and certified to be able to give you this type of test, any score that you got online, I'm sorry, it doesn't count. So what intelligence tells us about a person is their knowledge base, what they may be capable of mentally in terms of their reasoning and processing speed and reaction time and things like that, how well they can use information, both information that's new as well as information that they already know. It tells us how well they can adapt to a new situation. And intelligence should tell us something about what a person is capable of right now and also potentially in the future. But intelligence is not fixed. Many people believe that you are born with the intelligence that you are always going to have, and trying to change that is futile. But that is not true whatsoever. If you think that's true, you are wrong. Intelligence is not fixed. Psychologists believe that people have what is called a reaction range. So let's say that your intelligence, according to an IQ test, we'll just use this for the example, is 100. That means that with work, with practice, with trying to improve your intelligence over time, you could potentially raise your IQ score by a couple of points. But if you don't apply yourself, if you don't put yourself into situations that will help improve your intelligence, your IQ could also be lower. It just depends what you do with your intelligence. So intelligence is something that you can work on. And this is why we give things like IQ tests to children in school. The purpose is actually to identify kids who are struggling in school and who may have an intellectual disability, so that we can help those kids and help them improve their intelligence so that they can better function in everyday life. And I'm not promising that miracles can happen and that everybody is capable of being Einstein. I'm not saying that, but everybody is capable of becoming more intelligent through experiences. And if your experiences don't require a higher level of intelligence, well, then your intelligence may also lower over time. It just depends. And while some types of intelligence do tend to have more of a genetic basis, more of an age basis, so things like working memory, fluid intelligence, and so on, where these types of intelligence tend to decrease as we get older, other types of intelligence, like crystallized intelligence, which is our knowledge base, should improve as we get older. Intelligence is by no means fixed. So that's everything that I have for you about intelligence. Please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Ding that notification bell for alerts as to when I upload videos in the future. Go ahead and leave me a comment down below as to what type of intelligence you think you are best at. I would love to hear it. I've also included a link in the description down below to a blog post I wrote about intelligence. It also includes some more information about IQ testing and the history behind that. Super interesting. I definitely encourage you to check that out. Subscribe if you are not already for more psychology content from me. I do upload once or twice weekly. And I will see you next time. Bye!